Hello everybody and welcome to another Cyber Lounge webinar. We're joined again this time by Milda Petraityte, I believe that's
Correct.
how you say it. And today we're going to be talking about your risk management journey. I see we've already got some people in the comments. Throughout this, this will be a presentation, right? And so I think for everyone in the comments, get your questions in, we'll answer them at the end. Really make sure to do that. I'll put a banner up now. And also let us know where you're watching from. Milda, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Oscar. So my name is Milda, as Oscar already said, and I'm Senior Lead Consultant at Brightwell Consulting. And today I would like to go back to the beginning, so to say, to speak about the basics and the fundamentals. And even though I do love technology and more like technical subjects, but the thing that I keep noticing is that many times we don't get things right from the beginning. And even though we would like to get into more technical weed, we don't manage to get things right higher on top. And when we don't manage to do that, it is effectively doesn't help us to achieve what we want in more technical lower levels. So this is mainly based on my experience and something that I've seen over, well, I wouldn't say over the years, over past months and similar projects I've been doing on risk assessment, which I would like to show you, and something that I thought is worth just discussing and kind of putting out there, simply because I could keep coming up with the same kind of problems and questions, and I think they stem from the same subject. So that's why the presentation, and let me tell you what I've got here. So obviously let us know if you have any questions and if you want something specific answered, especially from what I will be presenting and what I will be saying. Will be much more interesting if I can answer what you have in mind.
Okay, and I think without further ado, I'm going to just go over to the presentation. And I think, remember, questions in, and here we go.
Okay, so I think if you read the description of the webinar, it's not so much about discussing what word means what, but I think it is very important to understand what we are speaking about when we say certain things, when we try to analyze certain aspects of security and risk management. And I think that this kind of language very much affects our ability to converse with levels higher above, say like top management, senior management, and leadership, whatever way you want to call them. So I think if you get their understanding, their language right, and adapt it to your level, and vice versa, translate what you want to say into their language, you will have an easier way of getting budget and that kind of thing. So, I mean, without further explanation, probably it's worth just getting into what I mean. So you can see a lot of these concepts, and many times I notice that people and organizations use them interchangeably, although they are not this one and the same thing. So I notice people speak about risk when they actually mean some kind of finding an issue, a problem that they need to resolve, or let's say they speak about risk as a vulnerability, they speak about risk as a threat, and similar things. And all of these words, it seems like they are sort of the same, but in fact they are not. And I think this is where the misunderstanding comes between different teams and levels in the organization. So if you ever felt frustration that you can't get somehow message delivered to the top management, if you feel like they just don't get it, they just don't understand when you say something to them, if you feel like whenever you want for some sort of project or program improvement and you ask for more budget, they wouldn't give it to you because they think that it's not necessary, is probably where your problem is. And probably it could be, if you resolve these issues, it might make it much easier for you to converse with the management and the higher levels. So let us have a look at what it actually all means. So when we speak about vulnerabilities and threats, what are they and why are they not risks? So vulnerability is not a risk because, say, the context here, what I heard previously saying that we are vulnerable because of our website. So if you say something like that to the management, they don't get it. They just say, well, what do you mean? We are vulnerable because of what? So what does it mean for ourselves? And it is not an issue itself, but it could be related to an issue. Let's say if it is a vulnerability, it could be maybe a problem that you need to fix, or maybe it is very low that you could ignore it. But that's again something that we will come to a little bit later. By definition, vulnerability could be said it's something like a state of being open to injury. So it's basically a gap or deficiency in an asset. So vulnerability is never separate from an asset. You always speak about vulnerability in an asset. If you have an asset, it's most likely that you will have some kind of vulnerabilities in an asset, whether they are known or unknown. And again, keep in mind that, because that will be part of the discussion going forward and part of the several formulas that I will show you. So when we speak about vulnerabilities, they're always connected to an asset. And also vulnerability is pretty much something that we can control. It's probably one thing that we can mitigate after all, because we can either fix vulnerability or we can get rid of it by getting rid of the asset which has that vulnerability. So it's up to us how we want to deal with it. Now, talking about threats, again, many times organizations or people say something about threat as being a risk, say in a context of, let's say there's a threat that our website can be hacked. And so is it a threat? Do you mean, is there some kind of risk that is related to your website being hacked? And you know, the kind of conversation goes that way, but it doesn't give any context and doesn't say what exactly, how that could happen, or what would be the impact to the business. So at the same time, it is not a vulnerability and it is not an issue by itself. The threat is something that, well, anyone or anything which could exploit a vulnerability and cause damage. So a threat essentially is something that takes advantage of vulnerability as a vulnerability in an asset. And typically a threat is something that we won't be able to control, simply because we can't control the APTs, we can't control natural disasters, maybe we can't basically deal with external factors as long as that is not related to how much we want to fix a vulnerability. So this is the difference between the two of them. And as I said, they're typically like a triangle between vulnerabilities, threats, and assets. So understanding our assets, understanding vulnerabilities helps us understand what kind of gaps we have in those assets that threats could take advantage of. So moving forward, what does it mean essentially? So when we speak about vulnerability and a threat, essentially we say that we have a risk of some kind. It's pretty much a formula of 1 times 1, or it's 1 and 0. It either exists or it doesn't. So either vulnerability exists or it doesn't. Either the threat exists or it doesn't. So a risk will be either 1 or 0. And here, essentially, what we try to find out is whether we have a risk at all. We don't try to evaluate at this point in time whether a risk is big or is low or is important or is priority high or whatever. We just want to find out, is there a risk or not? do we have an asset which could be vulnerable? Yes or no? And could that asset be interested to some threat actor, or could it be exploited? Could something take advantage of that vulnerability? Yes or no? So essentially, it happens that the possibility of a vulnerability in an asset being exploited by a threat creates a risk. Now, this is very much probably the initial step, something that every tech team understands, and this is what eventually they try to convey to managers and top leadership, maybe. But this is not the full visibility, because for us, let's say, speaking the tech language, we understand that there is a problem, something that we discovered, we want to fix it. And we think that it might be potentially very high problem, but the business may not see it that way. And so why? Like, what kind of thing is there that we don't understand about the business that they don't see it that way? So let me take you to the next slide. So there's another thing that I wanted to show, essentially, because this is something that I noticed a lot in risk registers of organizations, where they think that they have a list of risks, but actually those are pretty much risks versus equals issues. Those are actually issues that they want to resolve, which they think are risks, but they're not. And here are the lists why. So an issue is something that already happened. It has facts and certainty about them, because, for example, again, coming back to example with the vulnerability, it says, let's say, because of bad coding practices, there's a vulnerability on our website. While the risk is something about a possibility, is a possibility for something to happen, and it's very much related to uncertainty. If it's something certain that we have a problem of some kind, this is no longer a risk. It is an issue that we want to resolve. So a risk would be, on the other hand, our website could be exploited if we have bad coding practices. So it is uncertainty. We could have them bad practices, or we might not have them, but it could be low risk or it could be high risk, because maybe coding practices could vary. Sometimes they could improve. Maybe something else we introduce at a later point, it could again go back to level that it was before. Then another thing could be comparable, that issues can be fixed and eradicated. So basically we bring issues down to zero, we close the ticket and it doesn't exist anymore, for example. With risk, it never disappears or go down to zero. Risk can only sort of go up and down on a sliding scale. It can become low or it can become high, depending on what kind of issues we've got that are associated with that risk. So I put a star next to never disappears, because there is a certain time when it can disappear, only when we remove the asset. When we spoke about vulnerabilities, I mentioned we always will have vulnerabilities as long as we have assets. But if we remove an asset, we disappear. The vulnerability of that asset means that there won't be a risk anymore. Then speaking about issues, we can get issues from as a result of from a control failure. So let's say we operate our controls, but a control fails for whatever reason. We have an issue. There's a kind of problem that we want to resolve. Risk, on the other hand, arises from some kind of changes and uncertainty. So we know that there's a possibility for something to happen if we make a change, but we don't know the extent of it. We don't know how difficult it could be. We don't know what kind of effects of it could be. That's a risk. That's possibility. That's uncertainty. And again, coming back to the issue, issues very much speak the technical language. So we say what has happened, what could happen, but in a way when we know about the technical issue. With the risk, it's more a management level language. We speak so what, we explain what could happen to the business if we don't resolve this kind of issue and don't resolve the risk. So going next, if you remember, we spoke about the possibility and impact. We spoke about the threats and vulnerabilities before, when we said that they possibly create a risk. So they fit into the formula under the possibility. So as possibility, likelihood, I think there could be some other ways of calling it, but essentially the formula is likelihood times impact, and it creates a risk. Threats and vulnerabilities, together with the assets, come under the possibility. And the impact itself is the next dimension, which I mentioned is missing from the initial formula, where we try to understand whether the risk is there or not. Impact is the context, the kind of business context that we give to the formula when we speak about the risk to the business. We don't only say there is a problem, but we say how big is the problem. So this way, we don't speak about an issue which we want to fix. We speak about a possibility of something happening because we have that issue. So this way, we provide another level, the kind of business level, to our issue that we want to present to the management. So as I mentioned here, the evaluation of impact sets the business context in which a possibility for harm exists. And I think that's pretty much the kind of level that is many times missing in the assessments that I've seen in the past. People very much evaluate what are the threats and vulnerabilities, but when they speak about the impact, they don't manage to deliver that message, because there are some reasons which I will come, I will come to in the next few slides. So now, since I introduced that business language, I want to speak about how you can take this whole risk management context to sort of the next level, and building these fundamentals. It could impact your risk management delivery, the kind of way you speak to the management, and the way essentially you become maybe more successful, not necessarily the most successful, but at least it gives some angle of success because you start speaking the same language of the business. So this maybe, well, it should give you some sort of context of what people think living in their zone, in their circle. So if we speak about this time, not necessarily timelines, just the kind of the context. You can see on the lowest level, we speak about technical details, and we speak about some sort of issues and vulnerabilities and threats that we have. So coming back to the same example, the same about the vulnerability on a website. This is just the kind of lowest level detail that we understand. Next level would be understanding how does that impact the business? What does it mean if we have that vulnerability on a website? Then it gives more context in terms of the business and its goals, and then the performance of the business overall. Now, who cares about this? Who cares about what? So obviously these level type, lower level issues are more something that is more concerning for engineers, technical teams, all sorts of security and SOC people. So that's why you have the audience that is more concerned about this here. It's just the why that they are talking. They're speaking about the what. And the kind of metrics that they discuss about, they are operational and administrative. While when we speak about the management, the top leadership, for them, what they care about is so what. So anything that you can attach the dollar sign to. They care whether they will lose sale opportunities, whether they will have lower earnings potentially. They will care about the overall program and the project planning. And so the risk to the business that you can assign a dollar sign to is something that they will understand. So this is essentially another dimension. If you can manage to make these worlds collide, they will much better understand what your meaning is. So maybe something to mention here as well is when we speak about risk management, sometimes I notice that teams who don't manage to speak to the top management, to the higher people more senior than them to deliver the message and deliver the kind of risks that they want to talk about, they have typically the mindset of fixing everything. And this is not bad. This is very much the technical mindset. This is the kind of mindset that most of technology professionals and engineers have, because if we have a problem, we want to fix them. This is kind of natural and normal to us. The problem, though, is that we might not need to fix everything. It's very much not up to us to make that decision. So probably to start with, maybe worth mentioning what risk management is not. So we can't have 100% security. There's no such thing, because, as I mentioned before, we have assets which could have known or unknown vulnerabilities. They could be discovered at any point in time. We don't know about them yet, but we might know about them later. So if we try to have 100% security, it will be a never-ending effort, which is actually futile, maybe. Also, the next thing related to that is where we want to have all issues fixed. And as I said before, there's no 100% security. Next thing that I noticed about security, sometimes teams, sometimes maybe some individuals, is some sort of, I understand that people want to feel like they are doing a very important job, which they do. The problem, though, is that it's not something that a security team makes others to do. So security is not there to tell what needs to happen in the business, because they are not the department that controls the organization. And also, many times there are people complaining about health issues because they are overworked. There is so much work in security. There's just a lot going on for one person, impossible to do. That's a kind of superhero mentality as well, which is really not healthy, because this is not a job for one person. And the last thing, which also worth mentioning, some teams prefer to work by themselves and do all the risk management and sort of security problem management activities by themselves, because they think that somehow this is something that security does, or even it might be something that the entire organization thinks that this is a security thing. This is not something that is relevant to them. But what I noticed from the successful organizations and successful teams is that risk management is very much about understanding where everybody's role is, where is everybody's responsibility, and where are the boundaries of what everybody does. So everybody has a role to play, and security should be one of the role players, but not maybe the main dictator that tells everybody else what is supposed to be done. The teams that I've seen perform most successfully are the ones who think that security is just one of the services provided in the organization. Just like HR provides services to the key teams, like maybe finance and legal provide services. It's not something that they take ownership of. They ask teams what you need, let's say in terms of resources, how many people do you need? It's not like HR goes away and hires that many people that they think organizations should have. So same with security. Security should ask the business owners, what do you want me to do? How much do you want me to put effort in? So that would come back to the risk appetite. How much do you want to invest for me to solve your problem? And let the business decide. And this way, it's going to be obvious that the ownership is with the person who makes the decisions, and that person then has a problem to provide resources, and obviously to provide even increase the team sizes if that's necessary. And again, coming back to prioritization, for example, it's probably too difficult for security teams or tech teams to understand where does each problem fit into the wider context. But when we speak in language of risks and higher leadership language, it's much easier for them to understand how problematic is what we are presenting. How does it fit into the context of everything else that is going on with the organization? Maybe we are simply not aware about the wider context. And so for us, it might be difficult to prioritize without putting it into the right context. And then the last thing, the enemy of good risk management is that working in silos. So communication and frequent delivery of factual and complete information goes a long way to speaking with all stakeholders in their business language. So keeping everybody informed about the risks that were found in their language will help them very much understand what is the problem that the business could be facing if those problems are not solved. So something as a final takeaway, this is something that I think, well, it's again something from my experience and sort of best practices as a something that I also noticed helps to build these good security programs is should start from the very beginning, from the top, and asking the questions why we need to do this. So why we are doing security the way we do it, simply because, first of all, we need to understand the business goals. What kind of goal does the business have? Maybe you have an e-commerce website where the most important thing is that it stays up all the time, that customers can use it. So essentially, without understanding what the business wants you to do, you wouldn't be able to develop the rest of the security program. So the first question to ask is, what do you want me to do, Mr. Business? What kind of business goal do you have? And if that goal is keeping the website up and running and secure all the time, providing great customer experience, that is something that is the goal for the entire organization. Now, in that context, you can set security objectives against business goals. So knowing that, we can then think about how do we keep the website always running and secure. So we need to understand how to secure our underlying infrastructure, how we can secure customer details, potentially for payments. How can we secure the website from going down, let's say, in DDoS attacks or some kind of similar events. So these kind of goals we create for ourselves, and then we can understand what kind of risks do we have which could impact those business objectives in the first place. Then we go into applying and implementing controls to mitigate those risks. And eventually, in all of this, we monitor and test the performance of those controls. We want to improve their maturity, because mature and strong controls are most effective in mitigating the risks that we have. And now the last level, it doesn't go up the stack like it goes down in the slide. It goes back into the business goals and security objectives. We don't want to report the performance towards meeting some sort of monitoring of our control objectives. We speak about monitoring the performance towards the security objectives and goals. And this is where, again, the business understands. We say we have all these risks we work towards, and we potentially can't mitigate them because we don't have enough controls applied to those risks. But all we typically talk about to the business and making sure that they understand this is about the business goals and security objectives that we have related to these business goals. So this would be probably the kind of everything that I had to say, everything that I wanted to present around this, and I hope that kind of helps to understand the how everything fits together and why it is important to understand what do you mean when you speak about issue, what do you mean when we speak about a vulnerability or a threat or a risk, and how they interact with each other, how they fit into this overall risk management and the framework itself, I suppose. So I'll see if Oscar has any questions now from the audience, and maybe we can answer some of them.
I do have questions from the audience, and thank you, Milda, for that presentation. Yeah, so anyone still in the comments, let's get your questions in now. We do have a few. One is here from Danielle. There's been a bit of a conversation in the comments, people answering this, but I'll put it to you. Is there ever zero risk? Could you give some examples of when the risk would be zero?
So if you remember the formula I was showing, the risk exists when we have a vulnerability and a threat. So that's just a multiplication of 1 and 1. If we don't have a vulnerability or if we don't have a threat, then there is no risk because the multiplication is 1 times 0. So mathematically, that's a zero risk, right? Now, how is that achieved? So if you have an asset which has a vulnerability, that's already a 1. Now, next thing you need to understand, do you have a threat for that vulnerability? Because it might be that it is maybe a very exploitable vulnerability, so you always will have a threat. Maybe that's a very, very specific vulnerability that is targeted by maybe just the nation states, and you are some small business that doesn't deal with anything important. Is that a threat? Maybe. Then again, if you want to remove a risk, you can do that by removing a vulnerability and removing an asset. So if you don't have an asset, that means you don't have a vulnerability. Even if you have a threat, the threat doesn't have anything to exploit. So it's just a kind of thinking in that formula, either vulnerability or threat. If you have one, but you don't have another, there's no risk. If you have one or the other, one and the other, then it's a risk. So this is the kind of way you manipulate the thinking, I think.
Yeah, and Daniel said a vulnerability can be seen as a weakness in an asset that exposes the asset to the possibility of being attacked, compromised, or harmed. Yeah,
exactly.
I say there's another question here. As a consultant, if I were to start a risk assessment for a client firm, what is the most important things I should concentrate on?
So first of all, I think that's, well, again, probably coming back to the key takeaways I had on the last slide. The most important thing at all times ever is understanding the business and the context, very much understanding what they're trying to achieve, what they're trying to do, why they exist, let's say. So understanding their, maybe another way to say it, understand their crown jewels, what they are protecting, what is important to them. So this way you will understand what kind of problems most likely occur, or where do they need to focus the most. Speaking about how do you perform a risk assessment, well, there are loads of ways to perform a risk assessment. I think it's very much up to the organizational culture, maybe the way you want to start it, maybe. You could do various ways. To be honest, it's probably not going to be enough time if I start telling about various different ways.
That's fine. Someone said the golden rule is understand the business and context of the organization, what type of data in the scope, applicable laws and regulations, and technology complexity.
Yep, very much so.
Okay, and so why is it important to get the concepts of risk management right?
So I think the way, as I said from the beginning, getting the concepts right will help you to start on the right foot, so to say. it's more difficult to change something halfway through when you realize that something is not working, rather than get it right from the start and build on it. It's, you can say, well, it's kind of difficult to get it right from the beginning, but at least you should have in your mind very clear view of how you will get where you want to be. If you just dart around, let's say one time you speak about an issue, other time you speak about risk, other time you speak about the vulnerability, or any other concepts that I didn't cover maybe, it will be very difficult for your audience to understand what you want, what you mean actually, what are you speaking about. So it's not consistent. It's also very difficult to be consistent in your monitoring and reporting to the management if you're not consistent in the way you do things in your risk management program. It's also very, very difficult to report on progress in risk management if you are just resolving and closing issues. Because, well, imagine if you have, I don't know, let's say 20 issues, and you present them to the management, say, well, we need to do something about them. You close them off, maybe you have 5 left. So the business thinks there's no more any problem. And the next time you might come up with other 30 issues because you just had an audit. And the business will be unhappy, saying, well, how did they come from? Where did they come from? Because we thought we resolved everything. So the business thinks about risk as something that comes and it doesn't come and go completely, just goes on that sliding scale up or down. It's either going higher in risk or lower. So you never sort of get rid of it. While you can close the issues, but that doesn't give the organization the context in which those issues operate. So what does that mean? Like, if we give you more money and next time you have more issues, that doesn't work. So this way, then business doesn't see how they solve the problems. They just don't think that it works. You know what I mean? So this is where I think it's really, really important to understand what you're talking when you're what you're talking about when you're saying issues, risks, and how you're talking to the management and how you present it then as a consequence.
Incredible. And so why is it necessary to have a risk management methodology workflow?
So this way, the workflow simply sets everything into places. So, maybe coming back to what I mentioned about the RACI and knowing where everybody sits, the kind of governance, who's the risk owner, who's maybe asset owner or control owner, who works on what, and how everything's supposed to work. Because again, sometimes organizations might have multiple risk registers, because there's security risk register, there's operational risk register, there's some other risk registers, and there's like loads of various registers floating around. People think about their own area as something that they work in, and something else is not relevant to them, but it could be very much relevant if, let's say, we speak about HR risks in security. We want to work and collaborate with HR, so they need to understand where they fit in. And that's just one example. There could be loads of other departments that are relevant to this kind of example. So that workflow needs to be very well defined so that the security team can be orchestrating the entire program and how all of this management system works.
And so these two things, the concept and the workflow, does it make a difference when you're reporting the risk status to senior management?
Can you repeat, please?
So the concepts and the workflow we just talked about, does it make a difference when reporting the risk status to senior management?
Right. Okay. Yeah, of course. So it very much depends on which level you're speaking. So if you're speaking to the management on that lower level, the control level, the kind of issues that we've seen, the kind of problems that we want to resolve, the management won't understand you. As I said, that needs to be the kind of business language. So a little higher up, it needs to have that business context, the understanding of the impact of the issue that you're speaking about. So yeah, that's just another layer to add on.
So a big problem in cyber is with funding, just getting the right budgets and stuff. So how does using risk management help to get more funding and resources for infosec projects?
So I think I would probably start from a different angle, just to say, why do you need that budget? Why do you need those resources? Because is that because you have so much work to be done that nobody notices? And why does nobody notice that then? So if nobody notices the work that you need to do, have you spoken to people, and have you collected the needs of the business? So how do you know that what you need to do is something that the business needs, actually? So instead of knowing what you want to do and how many things you want to fix, it is probably better to kind of turn it around and go back to the business and say, Mr. Business, what do you want me to do? So you can present problems to the risk owners, to the business, and say, well, we have these kind of problems. Well, let's say, I don't know, maybe come back to the same website example. We've got this issue with this website, which means if we don't fix it, we will lose customers, whatever that might be, loss per day or something like that. And the business understands that this way you can't lose you can't lose revenue. That is exactly what the dollar signs means. What do we do? So this way, then you can give a solution. You can say, well, we can do this and this and that. And they can choose. Either they want to live with it, either they want to resolve it, or they want to do, I don't know, something else with it maybe. So if they want to resolve it, well, you can set up a program and say, this will cost us this much. And the business then can take a decision. Is that meaningful to them? Do they want to do something about that, or do they want to live with it? So this way, the business is the kind of entity that makes the decisions about the issues that you want to solve. They are in control, and you don't need to make those decisions that you are not in a place to make, because you are a service provider, essentially. You want to help them to run their business. You can inform them. You can tell them everything they need to know, but you are not there to make the decision instead of the business. So if you can't get funding, well, maybe you've not informed them very well. Maybe they don't understand why they can't get that funding, why they should give you that funding. So I would say, go back again to the fundamentals and see, how did you inform them? How did you educate them? Did you help them to understand what the problem is? Does this relate to business goals in the first place? Because maybe there's something that is not very important for the entire organization. If it is your job to educate people first. Tell them what could happen if that is not done in the business language. And that probably needs to be repeated until people start saying it back to you themselves. And once they do, then you can discuss how that can be fixed and how the program should run.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, communication is so important in cybersecurity, with all scopes. People who know nothing and people who know a lot more than you. It's it's a fundamental thing. So I think we're about time, unfortunately. I'd just like to thank you, Milda, again. That was a great presentation. We've got lots of comments saying how great the presentation was.
Great. Thank you.
So thank you to everyone in the comments and to everyone who watched live. We will have events coming up in the future. For more information on that, join the Cyber Lounge group on LinkedIn. That's where we keep you posted. Thank you again to Milda for being on here again. And I think that's everything. Everyone, thank you again. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.